Do your mountain drawings look like this? I'm going to show you how to turn them into this in just a few basic steps. Step number one when drawing mountains is super easy. You're just deciding which direction your light is coming from. So I'm going to have the sun over here on the left side. And just like that, we're already on step number two, which is to draw in our ridge lines. So our first ridge line is going to be the entire mountain here. Now as you go along, be sure to add little bumps and ridges to make it more dynamic and not just a simple triangle. Think of ridge lines as the foundation of your mountain drawing. Not only is it defining the shape of your mountain and all the mountain sides, but it's also defining your mountain's relationship with the sun in terms of where the highlights and the shadows will fall. Now from the peak of our mountain coming down, I'm going to draw a center ridge line, and I'm going to have more sharp angles coming through here to make a really dynamic ridge line that will come and shape this front side of our mountain that is facing the sun. So now with our main mountain drawn in, you can see how it's going to interact with the sun, with this left side being in our highlights, and this ridge line defining where our shadows will start on this right side. So with that being said, I'm just going to shade in our shadow side lightly. I'm just using a 2B pencil here, and you can see to get a really soft application of the graphite, I have a really steep angle on it as I shade in this right side. Okay, so a couple little things before we move on. You can see this little ridge that I had pop up here in the shadow side. But remember, we're trying to draw a 3D shape here. So we would probably catch a little bit of the other side of the mountain that might get a little bit of sun. So I'm just going to add this little line here to show that opposite side of the mountain here. Paying attention and adding in little things like that really adds that little extra detail that will help pull off your mountain drawings. Now the second thing I want to point out is where we had this center ridge line come down. Think of all these little jagged lines that come up and over as your front highlighted side overlapping your shadow side. So these would be almost like little canyons on the shadow side. And so basically what I'm saying is these little canyons would be the darkest part of your shadows. And then it comes back out to these lighter shadows out here. Let's put another mountain in our background. We're going to push our skills just a little bit, but I'm still starting out with the ridge lines here. So I'm kind of creating a bowl-like mountain here. So then we'd have our shadows coming down. So to make some sense out of this bowl shape I have going, this is our light side facing the sun, and so is this. And down here are these ridge lines coming off in our shadowy areas. So, just like we did over here, I'm going to shade in the shadowy areas. So these are just all little peaks, kind of like up here, where I'm shading in the opposite side of the mountain coming down. And then here is where the shade starts to come in again. I'm going to have the sun hitting the top of this mountain right here, just to make it visually more interesting and to break up these shadows a little bit. Okay, so I'm just evening out these shadows a little bit here, but with our ridge lines and shadows in order, let's move on to the next step, which is adding our directional lines. Directional lines are really important because they show the slope of your mountain, and where they change direction, they can form and shape your various mountain sides. Now you can see I like to continue the effect of cracks in the mountain rock and have some directional lines continue out from these jagged areas in our center ridge line. So an easy way to figure out where you want to add some directional lines is where you have changes in the different angles of your ridge line. That's where it's going to make the most sense for them to naturally occur. I'm going to give our directional lines on the shadow side a different look and add some slight bends to them. I like to think of this style of directional lines as representing where little creeks or rivers might run down the mountain and form some lower valleys. So these lines come together sometimes, and often these would all flow into like a river or something at the bottom of the mountain. Of course, feel free to make your directional lines the same as we did on the highlight side, but I like to vary the lines like this between the highlight and shadow side because it's another form of contrast between the lights and darks of our drawing. Let's do the same in our background mountains as well. Of course, there are going to be fewer lines, but it's the same mentality coming off of these different changes and angles in your ridge lines. Also, be sure to add some to your shadows. Additionally, on the highlight side, I'm going to add in some really soft, subtle shadows. From this distance away, you're probably not going to see small directional lines, but you might see major shifts in the mountains. So I'd rather do some really soft shadows here with my 4H pencil. However, you can see with my pencil, I'm still making marks in the direction of the slope of the mountain. Okay, so I'm happy with all of our directional lines. You can see the slope of all of our different mountainsides. You can see where it starts to shift. However, our mountain is just sort of floating out here. There's no impression of scale or perspective, so you might just think this is a boulder and might not be seen as a mountain. So the fourth step is to give it context. So first I'm going to add in a foreground. So with my 4H pencil, I'm just going to lightly sketch in where the mountainside would meet flat ground. And you can see I'm kind of zigzagging and framing out my flat ground around where those directional lines end to give it a nice shape. Now I'm drawing in this foreground line really lightly because I want to line my mountain with trees. Since this tutorial is about how to draw mountains, I'm not going to get into the details of how to draw trees. The important thing here is give your mountains context in the scene. However, linked above is a tutorial on how I draw my trees, and I'll also put it down in the description. I would also recommend checking out my playlist, Techniques to Draw Any Landscape, which I'll also link down in the description. That's full of all sorts of tips to draw lots of different elements, and I think one tutorial in particular that would help with your mindset in drawing mountains is the video How to Draw Rocks and Boulders. Besides lining the bottom of my mountainside with trees, I want to make sure I get a few random ones placed throughout as well. Just because I don't want things to look too orderly, random is good. And if you want, let your trees go up into your mountain a little bit. Again, just making it a little bit more dynamic and not quite as flat. Okay, so of course, if you want more trees in your foreground, go for it. But this is good for me. So continuing on with context, we have our foreground, which of course leads us to, we need a sky. So now I'm going to draw some clouds and a sky to finish off this mountain. Again, I'm not going to go into full detail on my cloud drawing process. My tutorial on clouds is linked above. Again, I'll put it down in the description. And so with our clouds done, that finishes off our mountain scene. So following these 4 steps, let me know how your mountain drawings turn out down in the comments. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.